Witcher is a weird word. It's a testament to the success of this series that you might disagree with the very first sentence of this video. It's easy to forget the humble beginnings that are now so distant from the pristine presentation of Witcher 3, and how greatly its presence has penetrated the landscape of gaming. Yet it's still true. Witcher is a weird word. The problem is that right now you may not even be listening to me. Instead, your eyes may have fixated on the numbers at the bottom left of your video player. Even for those familiar with my videos, that is a large number, and this is only the first of 3 videos, so imagine what the sum of all of them would be. So even though it ruins the punch of this video's opening, I feel it's necessary to justify the length of this video series. It is not quite as absurd as it first appears because this is about 3 games, which is really 4 games because all by itself, the Blood and Wine DLC expansion for Witcher 3 is longer than either Witcher 1 or 2. I played these games multiple times, making different decisions and importing saves as I went. I read the entirety of the original 5-part Witcher saga written by Andrzej Sapkowski, and also the first 2 collections of short stories, The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny. I played through the standalone Gwent game Thronebreaker. I learned Polish to reread the books in their native language to truly understand their beauty. I also played 10 other games, including finishing the entire Mass Effect trilogy, plus another game that I'll reveal as a surprise later. I felt they were necessary to draw experience from and use for comparisons to fully explore how these Witcher games succeed and fail. I also didn't shave or cut my hair for 2 years and started wearing it in a top knot like Geralt does. Only one of those was a lie, by the way, and it's not the hair one. Look, I know to some of you seeing a video this long for me is the visual equivalent of hearing... But to others, it's best to look at this video as a TV miniseries becoming available at once, with the start of each episode linked in the pinned comment below. And the same for the other videos that I've already finished on Witcher 2 and 3 that will soon be released. And as scummy as this may sound, and as scummy as I'm going to feel doing it, these videos took over 5,000 hours for me to make, so I'm going to plug my Patreon and PayPal. If you'd like to support my videos, toss a coin to your Witcher, O Valley of Plenty. After all of that, I don't think the monstrous lengths of these videos are unjustified. In fact, there are a few topics that I think could still be explored in more depth. We're going to get to that in just a few seconds, but there's one other thing that I think is worth mentioning now right at the start. Each of these 3 games do things better than the others. There is no clear best in every way Witcher game, even though the 3rd one is my favorite overall. However, and this was the most surprising thing I encountered while making this video, the books were even better than that. I spent 100 hours with Witcher 1, another 100 hours with Witcher 2, 500 hours with Witcher 3 and its expansions, a few hundred hours with other games, and over 100 reading these 7 books. And it was that time that I enjoyed more than anything else. It was a delight to discover what is now my favorite fantasy book series, and I consider it a privilege to be able to devote so much time to analyzing these games and its world. Thank you so much for allowing me to do so, and I hope the following videos were worth the wait. In 2007, the first Witcher game was released. It was revealed in trailers before this, and I, like most people, had never heard the word Witcher before. While it was a phenomenon in Poland, mostly everywhere else the word sounds like someone trying to cheat at Scrabble. There are witch-is, you can be a witch, you can bewitch, you can be bewitched. There's the witching hour, something that has a witch-like quality could be described as witch-y. At an extreme stretch, a group of witches could argue over who is witchier, or God forbid, the witchiest. But witcher sounded like nonsense back then. I don't know if people still have that visceral reaction to it now, or if the success of the series is so prominent that most people have become slowly aware of it and don't find it ridiculous. I'd be really interested to know how a lot of people on Netflix reacted to seeing the name like pop up on the list before and had no knowledge of the games prior to that. A witcher is the male counterpart to a witch. The best way for it to click is to think of the female widow to the male widower. There's also a deep connection on both sides to the hunter-gatherer roles of our primitive history. Witches tend to make a home in one place. They are outcasts but still prefer to be permanent residents. They gather herbs, brew potions, cast spells, occasionally help with curses and minor monsters in their one sole area that they call home. Witchers also do much of this same work, including casting some simple spells, but they don't put down roots. They do less mundane problem-solving with alchemy than a traditional witch, and instead hunt monsters plaguing communities so that people can return to something close to normalcy, while the Witcher moves on to the next place and the next monster. Both witches and witchers deal with similar supernatural problems, and they are both similarly maligned because of it. something that can be traced through our own history, when some real-life women were truly persecuted as witches. One theory as to why is that they were often women that had gained some amount of notoriety as being effective healers, even though, of course, there was never any real magic. They could give advice, offer solutions to problems, and then be met with incredibly sharp disdain if they ever failed, or so happened to be a perfect scapegoat when too great a tragedy befell a settlement. So tragic that it must have either been the dark magic of a witch that was responsible, or punishment for allowing something inhuman to exist and prosper among them. There's also the more understandable reason that those who provide a service to dispose of a problem at a cost, of course, can quickly become associated with being that problem, or even responsible for it. In the case of a witcher, their freakish appearance and mutations play less of a role in making them hated than the fact that they refuse to work for free, a detail that is brought up time and time again throughout all of the games. They risk their lives for what often ends up being a pittance, but it's still a pittance that is profiting from misery. Witchers and witches sometimes deal in despair, and that can be impossible to shake even as they perform miracles on a budget that are worthy of ballads, not money. It's an interesting premise for a character, especially in a video game, but upon first encounter, Witcher is just a weird word, and it's a word the games have reveled in.
I'm a witcher, 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 I'm a witcher. Who do you think you are? A witcher, a witcher, witchers. Witcher, I'm Geralt of Rivia. Witcher, I'm Jeremy. Geralt, what? How do you know I'm a witcher? I'm a witcher, 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 I'm Geralt of Rivia. Witcher, just to be clear, polygon, assassin, that's 'cause I'm a witcher. You could use a witcher.
The world of The Witcher is just as interesting as this concept and character. For one, it has more in common with Shrek than it does Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, a Shrek that takes itself mostly seriously, often deathly so. Unfortunately, the video game series fails miserably to make this clear in its introduction. In fact, the opening of Witcher 1 is such a staggering stumble that I'm often stunned that this series got the opportunity to grow. And it's a harsh failing in more ways than one. I think it will surprise most of you watching that I played Witcher 1 at release. If you play it today, your only choice on Steam in good old games is the Enhanced Edition that was first released in 2008, a year after the original. I played that original version back in 2007, and I gave up after about 6 hours. The introduction of its story and characters were, quite bluntly, so cringy that I was forcing myself to keep going because I had a friend who promised me the game got better. Ultimately, it was the game's long load times that made me move on. Any load screen, whether it was traveling from one major area to another or entering a tiny house and then back out of it again, would take between 30 to 90 seconds, and you are constantly going through these transitions in every chapter. Thankfully, the Enhanced Edition addressed this problem, and I went back and finished the game more than 10 years ago. Unfortunately, though, none of the other updates smooth out how bad this introduction is in year 1. And yet, despite all of that, I feel like now I've become that friend I mentioned just a second ago. This game gets so much better after its first few hours, and you adapt, like your eyes in the dark, to the flaws that mar one of the most ambitious games I've ever played. CD Projekt Red were insane to try to pull off a game with a scope this large on their first release. You can make the same argument for Witcher 2, really, in that it wasn't until the third game that they finally matched reality with their imaginations.
Great opportunity to play some cards.
Yet this is nowhere near a total failure. I always got the sense from Witcher 1 and 2 that the devs were trying their damnedest despite the budgetary restrictions they faced, and they refused to phone anything in. There's passion in this game. This attempt for greatness with Witcher 1 is admirable, and I think they succeeded more than they failed, just not with this opening. The first narrated speech here relates to events that happen in the books. Everyone seems to think that Geralt should be dead, and is shocked that he's back and alive, even though he never stops looking like a corpse. There was a war that has passed, and these kingdoms are licking their wounds. There's a plague, monster populations have risen, things are looking pretty bad. It's all wonderful nonsense if you haven't read the books, but it makes perfect sense if you have. Shockingly, this is a trend that continues with many of the big story moments throughout the entire series, especially Witcher 2. However, in the case of Witcher 1, one, it might be better if you haven't read anything. I played all the games first, then read the books, and then played the games again. I've structured these videos in a similar way and will only interject some book details here and there until a larger book discussion and comparison later in the Witcher 3 video. Right now I just want to say that the first Witcher game is unique in my experience since it is both an adaptation and a continuation of a large book series. I do not envy the task that CD Projekt's writers had since overloading the player with book details would be alienating, but ignoring so much of Shreggxual's works will only sink book readers. I don't think they were that successful for those who read the books, but also that those who only played the games suffer similarly